now we're just going to go over some of the specific areas that have to do with this nonverbal, the perceptions that we see. So typically with this nonverbal environment, I like to have some activities that help us to better relate with what this looks like. And so next week you will also have another nonverbal type of project that we will have to do with, such as doing an observation maybe of someone from a different culture, a different background, where you will just quietly observe the individuals and some of the mannerisms that might be takeaways from this experience. You will learn some of the key factors that we look for within this nonverbal relationship of how we communicate culturally. I always like to use the example that I believe that, like I'd say over 50% of us all love to kind of people watch, and we kind of find ourselves catching ourselves glancing at others that might be engaged in something that we might see as odd, or it might be funny, or it might be something that they're doing that's a little embarrassing. However, it does inflict a reaction for us, and those are some of the ways also that we look at having and explaining these nonverbal perceptions. So we're going to go through some of those and take a look at some ways that we can learn a little bit more about how we communicate with verbal communication and nonverbal. We're going to move. These are some of the overall objectives that we're going to reflect on and look into today. Of course, we're going to look at comparing, how we communicate verbally versus nonverbal. And I have this wonderful set of examples, educational type of videos that will really help to give further illustrations to you as to some of these, the ways that we perceive and are perceived in these ways of nonverbal communication techniques. Okay, so now let's. Okay, so I'm going to start with this. This is a real cultural experience for us to look at, and it has to do with the implication of mannerisms and etiquette within the Asian culture with exchanging business cards. So be prepared after to review and comment as to some of the takeaways of what you've learned with this short video on etiquette of exchanging business cards.
Hello, I'm Cindy Seed, an etiquette coach based in San Francisco. The Asian culture has influenced the world in how we give and receive, use and keep business cards. They believe it's an extension of introducing yourself on paper. So whether you are traveling the world or simply conducting business in your own hometown, this ritual of Asian-style business card exchanges is now considered an international business protocol. The Asians believe a business card is a representation of who you are, and you are that business card. Be sure to present your card in clean, pristine condition, no different than you would your own body. Always present your card in your right hand or with both hands, facing the person to whom you are giving it. It is not appropriate to pass out cards as though you were dealing in a poker game. Never give a card in your left hand. It is considered a total insult in Muslim and other countries. So again, always presented in your right hand or with both hands. By presenting your card with both hands, it is the highest form of respect. Always receive a card in the same manner you presented it, either in the right hand or with both hands. Take time to study the card. This is your golden opportunity to help remember the person long after meeting. Ask the person a question or make a nice comment about the card. It's natural. You may want to make notes on a card, especially when the person asks you to please send them a brochure. But be sensitive, especially while still in front of the person, never to write on the face of the card. The Japanese believe it's like writing on the person's face. Instead, write any notes on a separate notepad. Remember never to take a card and immediately put it away. And gentlemen, do not pull your back pocket wallet out, place that card in the wallet, return it to your back hip pocket, and then sit on it. It's like sitting on a person's face. Always keep cards in a separate card carrying case. No more rubber bands or paper clips, which always dents them terribly. Keep the case in a purse or pocket that is located on the upper part of your body. And again, never place them in a back, hip, or pants pocket. Never ask a person for another card because you lost it. It is perceived as though you have lost their face. So do get those cards filed or entered into your database right away for safekeeping. So there you have it. A few simple tips on how to exchange business cards anywhere in the world.
Okay, so yeah, that is a new set of ways of us dealing with some of the things that are appropriate and inappropriate. Within our global society, we all have to look to new ways of making sure that we are appropriate, and coming up with the new normal. We might see some new traditions and some new forms of etiquette that could take place. So I'm going to ask a couple of students to see what the takeaway that they have for this might be. I'm going to start with Hannah. Hannah, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Hey, so within this video, what'd you think of it?
I thought that it was pretty interesting. I like how presenting a business card is like presenting yourself, because when I was in school, I had little student office cards and stuff like that, and I always made sure that mine looked good when I was handing them out to representatives and stuff, and I just think that reflected what I already had about that type of etiquette and kind of presenting yourself, and that I feel it's a little blurb about yourself sometimes, what you put on it. So I completely agree with the etiquette in the video.
Very cool. With our new normal and coming up with new things, do you think that this tradition might change at all with regard to how they handle this presentation of their cards?
I don't think so. I mean, a lot of stuff is virtual now, so virtual emails and stuff like that, sending out your information. But I feel giving out a business card is a lot more personal, and with that type of tradition of presenting it in a pristine way and being very professional about how you go about it, I feel it's a more personal exchange than something online. So I feel if people still want those personal connections, then I don't think that the tradition would change.
Yeah. And thank you so much for that. Good response on there. With in Asia, they typically call the business card your name card, and oftentimes it doesn't have a lot of, well, of course, usually it's going to be one side is usually in, Chinese, and the other is probably in English if it's a global type of environment. Very often, they are all just in their own language because that has been the way of thinking. But they refer to them as a name card. And if you remember earlier in the semester, we were talking about some of the differences in cultural values and customs, and this idea that within the Asian arena, first meetings are typically not discussing business per se. It's really just a formal face-to-face interaction. There's usually not a lot of planning and really doing presentations, etc. It's more of a getting to know you, time. And so this business card is, held in very high esteem. I remember, first being invited to, businesses and things like that. And they have lots of formal dinners and lunches. And that's mostly where a lot of the business is transacted. And if in fact you, for example, me being a foreigner there, and I might receive 6 to 8 different business cards in the entire group or luncheon or dinner. And it's so important to take time to exchange the business cards and to give them that time to make sure that they're being honored and then like-minded in return. However, oftentimes we as Westerners are very quick to maybe, okay, let me put this back in my holder or my card holder, or my, women, we might have a purse or something, we want to put that there. But the tradition is that you put the business cards very gently on the table in front of you during the meeting, and you keep it as if you're keeping it in high esteem. So if you have 4 or 5 business cards or people that you've met, it is proper etiquette to put all of those in front of you as a way of honoring individuals. I'm going to go next to let's see, Dana. Dana, are you there? Is Dana available? I know sometimes it's a little difficult to get to the microphone or your speaker, but just as a reminder, being that we are in class, please be attentive and be ready to respond. This is part of your participation grade. So, I know some people might step away or kind of get sidetracked, but yeah, I'm kind of taking roll if people aren't available. How about Adair? Adair, I know you have been there, so let's ask you, what is a takeaway that you got from this experience of exchanging business cards?
Something I thought was interesting about the video was just how they emphasize stopping and looking at the card and kind of putting the name to the face and really listening to them and getting to know them, because I'm from the West Coast and I know it's a little more relaxed and chill than even the East Coast where there's a lot more business, and I feel like we don't do that a lot. I hardly ever see people exchange business cards, and if they do, it's really fast and then you're on to the next thing.
Yeah.
And so I liked how they are really giving the person the attention that they deserve and getting to know them and take a long look at what they're offering.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, so these might be simple gestures, or you're wondering why spending so much time on this, but in our global society we have to be aware of things that are appropriate, especially in Department of Communications. We need to be aware of these different elements. We learned also about some of the cultures, some of the Middle Eastern customs have to do with not, certain hands are inappropriate to exchange, or handshakes, etc. And so these things are, they have a purpose. However, the new normal for the States is we might not ever shake hands anymore from what's taking place. So it's developing this new public safety awareness. And so, there might be some new changes definitely upon the horizon having to do with Western etiquette. Okay, so now let's go a little bit more into specifically understanding what this is. Let's see. Macy, are you there?
Yeah,
Hey, Macy, can you read this definition for me?
the one that's on the screen.
That's the one.
It says focuses on how you use words and language. Interaction may be face-to-face, fax-to-fax, over the phone, or through electronic mail, but regardless of the channel used, groups do their work through language.
Right. And so, yeah, this is pretty much what we use verbal communication for. And this is really the, the basic definition of what we're using this for. And right now, of course, we've been used to face-to-face and communication, and where most people feel that is best. But in this new trend of virtual communication, this might take on entirely new dynamics that we may have to learn ways to still communicate verbally where it's face-to-face, fax to fax. That's kind of an older term because not very many people use a fax machine anymore. I know that's pretty obsolete, but it's still part of the definition for individuals that do use this. Or speaking over the phone, whether we're using electronics now, email, and all of this has a lot to do with communicating well and using this verbal communication to really send these messages, to encode and decode messages. And the thing is that I wonder now is the awareness of us now communicating through a mask. It's now allowing us to have to maybe overemphasize certain things and to rethink and question what we are hearing. I'm going to ask, let's see, Levi. Levi, are you there?
Yeah.
Hey, Levi.
Sorry.
Yeah, no, I know it takes a minute, Yeah, so this area of verbal communication that we are, involved with, I know within your generation, I feel that many of you communicate much more frequently through, texting and basically texting and or texting. I wanted just to ask, how important is this verbal face-to-face communication to you as perceived in your generation? I know the older generation, we like that face-to-face communication. We want to go visit the office. We want to go speak to the sales rep. We want to go to the customer service department and speak to a person. So my question to you, Levi, how important is verbal communication to you and your generation?
Well, personally, I think there's two sides. Like for me, I really like verbal face-to-face communication because I like to be able to read people and read their facial expressions of when I'm speaking to them, and like because having a reference of how they're using the words and like what facial expression works with that or their tone of voice. But I do see majority of my generation drives away from that, where they aren't needed as much to the face-to-face. For example, my brother really likes to play video games, and he they call it like a party chat, and like when he's talking to online friends, and through that he'll tell his friends like, hey, do you want to party, using it as like reference to meaning a get together to talk to them, instead of like, hey, let's chat or something like that.
Mhm. Yeah. So some of the verbiage is even changing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And so it will be very interesting, especially to those of you that are communication majors, to see the dynamics of how this really is affecting, you know, our this new culture, this new you know, social media culture, and you know, the convenience of picking up a phone call, you know, picking up the phone and having a verbal, you know, chat, or even now the convenience of those that, you know, even if you can't meet face to face, is it still going to be good enough if we have to do that virtually? I mean, a lot of people are forced to do it, whether or not we enjoy it or not. So that question then leads us to, do we think it's going to change, or do we think it's going to be that new normal? So Levi, thanks for sharing that. I'm going to ask Nicholas. Nicholas, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Hey, Nicholas, on the same topic of this verbal communication and this way that we are learning to communicate, is this going to be the new normal as far as, are we going to go back to meetings face to face? Are we going back to that? Or do you think this is the new normal? Can you comment on that?
I do think that we'll go back to face-to-face meetings, just because of the like trust and connection that you gain so much more through that. And I don't even know exactly why, I guess through body language and things like that, but it just feels to me like you form a better bond with that person and can more easily understand them in face-to-face interactions.
Yeah.
So although they'll definitely, I think, maybe dwindle a little bit because of all of this stuff that's going on, I think they're still necessary for communication.
Okay, yeah, very good point. Right, you know, as I said, you know, kind of the old school, I'm definitely like a face-to-face person, you know, with really liking, you know, that form of communication. It's because it was like the culture that we were brought up on. But, you know, we're finding that with these new trends, a lot of it might have a lot to do with economic trends that are going to force businesses and companies to, you know, change over time. I think in general, we all do, as you said, we agree with, we like that form of trust. It's interesting now that with wearing our masks, you know, and out in public, it's a whole new environment of how we're able to communicate with our eyes. I think you know, when we were in class, I think I did mention about, I think it was Tyra Banks that said that she wanted to come up with this new term having to do with the new word is called smize, which means that we need to learn to smile with our eyes. And, you know, it's interesting with me, as far as my personality, I always felt that my greatest gift was when I'm face to face with people is I love to smile. I love that. I love to reassure individuals through my facial expressions and hand gestures and things like that. And so with that face to face, it's very, very important to me in my generation. But now it's interesting because I see that it seems to be a little bit of this coldness that takes place when we're out and about, because people don't have to smile at each other. You don't have to have eye contact with each other during this time with the masks and things wearing, but a simple nod might be the new smile. So, just things to think about through this. All right, let's go on to the next area. And now we're going to learn a little bit about this nonverbal portion. So let's go with it. So now that you have a little clearer understanding of communication and verbal communication, let's move right on into nonverbal. What is the meaning of nonverbal? So we look at this through the aspects of communication, such as using these gestures and or facial expressions that that don't necessarily involve this verbal portion of communication, but include the nonverbal aspects of the speech itself. For example, nonverbal specifically refers to a message or message components other than just the words that generate a certain meaning. Without nonverbal component, it could be really difficult to interpret the meaning of the spoken language. So some researchers claim that we convey as much as 2/3 of our meaning through nonverbal communication and behavior. So now that you have a little clearer understanding of within this non-verbal communication, that we have to look at the aspects of speech itself, as I mentioned, such as little glitch there. Additionally, we find within this non-verbal communication that we have to look at the aspects of speech itself, as I mentioned, such as the accent. Is it your first or second language? We have to also decipher the tone of voice and the speed of the speaking. So these are other valuable tools that are involved with this form of nonverbal communication that we need to be aware of. Okay, so I just wanted to go over this nonverbal versus verbal off the bat. Karen, I want to ask you, in your opinion, which one in the way you communicate is more beneficial to you? The verbal portion or the nonverbal?
Oh, I'm so sorry. You cut me right in the middle before leaving.
Oh, good. I'm glad I caught you. So, in your opinion, what's more valuable in this area of communication? Do you feel it's the verbal portion for you, or do you communicate better with nonverbal?
Well, for me, I have, like, for example, text messaging. Sometimes things can be misinterpreted, like you don't know the tone of voice. So I think it might have an equal weight to both, because when you verbally communicate, you can see the facial expressions and the tone, but when you don't, with nonverbal communication, oh my, I forgot my train of thought. I'm so sorry.
Yeah, obviously. So you said you're leaving? Are you leaving class early?
No, I commute, so I'm about to drive.
Oh, I get you. Yeah, I understand. Well, yeah, we do have a participatory area later in the class, so I hope that you're able to be there for it. All right? Okay, let's go ahead. Additionally, we move to this next area of this chart here of definitions having to do with the types of nonverbal communication that I think are very valuable for us to review. And let's just quickly go through those, and then we'll have a little conversation. Next, this information describes the types of nonverbal communication. And as you can see, they include body language, and also posture, eye contact, this paralanguage, closeness and or personal space, the proximity of, how close we are and distance, facial expressions, and psychological changes. Yeah, this new one is regarding the psychological changes is pretty major actually, and it states here how it identifies these psychological changes that happen to us based on our emotions. For example, if we're in a classroom and someone calls your name, all of a sudden you might get a little startled and your heart might race just a little bit. And another thing is that, right before a public speech or making a speech or presentation, you go from absolutely normal to nervous or shaking. And these are some of those indicators that that we need to be aware of in the types of nonverbal communication. This one area in the kinesics has to do with the body movement. For example, hand gestures and nodding, shaking your head, etc. We all do these on a regular basis. The next one is posture, and or how you or we stand and sit, and whether our arms are crossed and so on. Next, we talk about the eye contact. This has to do with the amount of eye contact often determines the level of trust and trustworthiness. I must admit, this is still one that I still am working on personally, keeping that true eye-to-eye contact. Next, we look at the paralanguage, and this has to do with the aspects of the voice apart from speech, such as the pitch and the tone and the speed of the speaking. Often in public speaking, we learn how to utilize our words, and we want to have certain tones and emphasize certain areas that we want to control how people are listening to what we are saying. So that has to do with the paralanguage. Next, we look at the closeness and the space, having to do with the proximity, which determines that level of intimacy. Sometimes we get a little uncomfortable if someone is too close upon us, and so this has a lot to do with different cultures and what is appropriate and maybe a little inappropriate for some. Next, we look at the facial expressions, including smiling, of course, blinking, having to do with certain intensity. And this facial expression that we use often sets the tone of comfortability throughout the world. Some countries, such as Asia, they don't really like you smiling too much. It's an area that they look at as maybe mistrust. Okay, so that has to do with facial expressions. And then there's also the psychological changes. For example, sometimes we might blink too much. We might not be aware of this. We might be having a little bit of sweat or perspiration if we're a little nervous, and our heart rate might increase as well. So these are some things that we might not even be able to control, but therefore they are very important in the psychological aspects of this nonverbal communication. So certain things to be aware of as we are communicating with others. One thing that I wanted to add is that with regard to this facial expressions of, with me, as I mentioned, I really enjoy smiling and communicating with that. I just feel that a smile is one of the easiest gifts that you can give to someone else. So it's just something that I enjoy, smiling. So, can you imagine with me thinking that this is one of my traits of great communication, going to an Asian country and smiling to everyone, and they just are like, what, can we trust this person? She really smiles quite a bit. So I had to really make a choice as to, was I going to change my comfort level in order to make sure, other people were not uncomfortable with my smiling. So my compromise was to just allow people to truly get to know me And, you know, through that trust was something that we did, that I was able to instill, and still today, you know, some of my dearest friends and family friends are in China based on us. Next, this information with each other. Okay, so now this area talks about groups and teams, etc. But I want to move forward throughout the slide that where we're going to start talking about these tools, two essential tools, of course. One is major communication, and then secondly is dealing with this nonverbal communication. So this is this wonderful slide that I mentioned to you. Dr. Alex Lyon is a wonderful communication expert, and I believe he has really strong a Christian perspective when sharing information, which is really refreshing to me. And he deals specifically within teams and teaching individuals how to truly and sincerely communicate. Let's take a look.
This week, we're going to be talking about verbal and nonverbal communication. And we have a special guest with us, my YouTube friend, Mary Daphne, and she is going to be helping us out. So let's get into it. I'd like to introduce you to my friend, Mary Daphne. She has her own YouTube channel.
Hey Alex, thanks for having me on your channel. I am so excited to be here.
Mary Daphne's channel helps millennials boost your social skills with a focus on relationship, productivity, and mental wellness. And at any point, you can find a link to her channel in the description below this video. So please take a look, subscribe, and show her some support. The main point of this video is that we observe verbal and nonverbal communication at the same moment. We don't usually separate these when we express ourselves, and we don't usually separate them when we are listening to somebody else communicate. We experience them all at the same moment. So both of these complement each other. A basic definition of verbal communication is the words and other utterances we use to express ourselves. Not surprising. Nonverbal communication is all of the rest. It's how you look, like your gestures and your face, and also how you sound, like your tone of voice, pacing, and pauses. So clearly, verbal communication has specific meaning, and some people think that nonverbal communication works the same way. Some people claim that they can literally read your nonverbals as if they know the secret code. But is that really the case? That's what we're going to talk about. Let's ask Mary Daphne what she thinks. Do nonverbal cues like gestures have specific meanings or not?
You know, Alex, that's a very interesting question. One way we can think about nonverbal gestures is through emblems and illustrators. Emblems are the nonverbal cues that have a universal meaning within a specific culture. For example, if we're talking about American culture, when we give a thumbs up, we know that means good job. Or circling our index finger next to our ear means that person is totally crazy. A really cool thing to note, however, is that emblems are decided by a particular society. This means that in one culture, a gesture could be very different from what it denotes in another culture. I remember when I was teaching a communication class in Istanbul, Turkey, and there were some Middle Eastern exchange students who were offended by the thumbs up gesture because it means something derogatory in their cultural context. So we have to be mindful that while emblems can have agreed upon meanings, they're inextricably linked to their cultural context. And so the meaning can vary significantly from culture to culture. Now, illustrators are interesting because unlike emblems, we use these automatically and subconsciously to illuminate the words we're speaking. It helps us paint a picture that our words are expressing. They're not explicitly taught to us or tied to a culture. They're often unique to the person, timing, and situation. Let's say someone's excited to see their friend. In addition to saying, "It's so great to see you," they use big sweeping gestures with their arms. These gestures signal joy and excitement. On the flip side, if you're in a high stakes meeting and are super nervous, you're probably going to be more reserved with your illustrators, possibly using stiff or jerky movements. And if you think about it, we still use these nonverbals even if no one's there to see them, such as when we're on the phone. They're deeply rooted in our communicative behavior. You know what's funny, Alex? When I'm editing my YouTube lessons, I don't even realize that I'm using illustrators because they just flow naturally.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I'm sure most people would likely agree. They don't usually think about the exact gestures they use. And by the way, I will link to all of the sources that we are talking about in the description below this video, so you can take a look at those. So in addition to emblems and illustrators, could you give us more detail about how verbal and nonverbal communication overlap? How do these work together?
There are 6 different ways that nonverbal and verbal communication interact in real life. So the first one is repeating. You can think of this one as the nonverbal behavior reinforcing the verbal message. In other words, you are repeating your message because you are essentially saying the same thing. For example, saying "nice job" while giving a thumbs up achieves this. Or you might say, "Don't interrupt me," while putting your hand out as repetition. The second one, substituting. So with substituting, you're using a gesture or some other form of nonverbal communication in place of a word. For instance, you might give a high five instead of saying, "Wow, that's awesome, congratulations." Number 3, turn taking. This one is about relying on nonverbal communication to signal turn taking. Let's imagine you're in a group conversation and you notice that Jimmy hasn't gotten a chance to say anything yet. Noticing that, you might lean in and do an outwardly gesture facing Jimmy to signal that maybe they would like to say something. Number 4, complementing the verbal message. So with complementing, you can think of enhancing your verbal message with nonverbal communication. You can use complementing to drive home a point or to clarify a message. For example, if you're giving your manager a rundown of your team's epic progress this quarter, you might gesture an upward chart signaling growth. Number 5, emphasizing. If I'm looking to really emphasize my point, I might use a strong gesture. But I could also leverage paralinguistics, which includes tone of voice, volume, inflection patterns, and pitch. Or I might change my word pacing or add some dramatic pause for that extra oomph. These are a few examples of ways to truly accentuate your verbal message, especially in the context of a speech, presentation, meeting, or pitch. And the last one, number 6, contradicting. This one is pretty interesting. This occurs when your nonverbals contradict your spoken words. So for instance, let's imagine a friend tells you they are in so much pain, but they're smiling. These are contradictory, right? Or imagine that a friend tells you that they had so much fun hanging out, but they have a deadpan look on their face. It almost seems sarcastic, right? Well, even if they're not being sarcastic, it sticks out like a sore thumb because what they are saying does not match how they are saying it.
That's a really helpful list. And on the last point, contradiction, there is a related term for this when our nonverbal communication doesn't match up with our verbal communication. In a poker game, they call this a tell to see if you're bluffing. Researchers call this nonverbal leakage. And even if you say how you feel with your words, other feelings can leak out through your nonverbals. So can you tell us a little bit more about this?
I love the terminology for this concept because it is such a visceral image. We can think of nonverbal leakage as our gestures blowing our cover, so to speak, when we're attempting to conceal something. For example, if we verbally express one thing, but our body language, facial expressions, and tone of voice are screaming something else entirely, our nonverbals are leaking into our words and altering our message. In other words, there's a disconnect between what we're saying and how we are saying it. Research shows that in studies on deception, 98% of people expressed nonverbal leakage when they were trying to hide a charged emotion like anger, jealousy, depression, or dishonesty. So viewers might be wondering, well, what does nonverbal leakage look like? Tone of voice is a huge giveaway, and so are body gestures that misalign with the verbal message. But there's also something called micro expressions, where an emotion will flash across the person's face. But you'll have to pay close attention or you'll miss it, because these happen as fast as 1/15th to 1/25th of a second. The 7 micro expressions, happiness, surprise, fear, anger, sadness, disgust, and contempt, are universal and exist across most cultures. Funny story, on a recent skiing adventure, my husband decided it would be fun for us to go boot packing, meaning climbing up the mountain outside of the ski resort bounds. I was mortified because not only had I not been skiing in over 10 years, I had never been backcountry, where I would have to carry my skis up an icy mountain with all of my heavy gear on. But I could see that he was really excited about this. So I said, sure, that's awesome. But as I said that, my hands were trembling, I was sweating profusely, and my eyebrows were deeply furrowed. Major nonverbal leakage, right? Well, fortunately, I had my face mask and goggles on, so he couldn't see any of it. It wasn't until after we made it down the mountain that I fessed up about how nervous I was. Much funnier in retrospect.
That's a great example about how microexpressions and nonverbal leakage work and how our nonverbal and verbal communication can sometimes send a mixed message. So thank you for helping us out today, Mary Daphne. It was great to have you on the channel.
That was a lot of fun. Thank you so much for having me, Alex.
So I encourage you to follow the link in the description below the video to take a look at Mary Daphne's channel.
Okay, as I said, I so respect this this speaker and the information that he provides through his knowledge and just sharing ways to better communicate. So we've learned a few items from this video having to do with emblems and illustrators, leakage, and this micro expressions. Moreover, what are these nonverbal gestures that that we are using, and which ones do you feel are maybe more authentic with our communicative type of behaviors? So I want to ask, I think I'm gonna go to Matthew. Matthew, are you there, Matthew?
Yes.
Okay, great. So first of all, what's the takeaway from this video clip that we took a look at regarding verbal and nonverbal? What was something that you learned or just want to comment on?
I thought it was interesting how she talked about like the mask hiding her nonverbal communications, especially now that we're all wearing masks all the time in public.
Right.
How much of like social cues we used to rely on. I mean, at some point they're going to find a vaccine and we're all going to be able to go back out in public without people being so weird about spacing and everything, hopefully. But I thought it was interesting that she like referenced how well it hid her expressions and how easily we can kind of hide ours now.
Right. It takes on the phrase, we're wearing a mask a little to a different degree, right? You know, in psychological arenas, they often say that people that don't really share their true feelings or emotions might be wearing a mask of who they really are, you know, so they're using this more as just like this metaphor of wearing a mask. Well, now it's a literal thing that we're doing. How much will it or does it change us being authentic or not? Right? Is it really a way that, do you find, let me just ask quickly on the tail of it, do you find yourself more comfortable communicating with people, perhaps strangers, than you did before? Is that an issue, or is that something that you were aware of?
I maybe a little bit, because like I definitely rely on like how people like respond. Like you can tell if somebody's like not really interested in having a conversation. Like if you're talking to somebody, you can read a lot into what should I say next based on how they react. But not too bad. I'm pretty extroverted, so.
Okay, yeah, that'll be great. Thank you so much for sharing that. Simeon, let's ask you a question here on this. I know you're going to be working on this face-to-face in your article, so it might be interesting in having your opinion about what you've learned through this. More specifically, what do you feel about learning the differences between the emblems and the illustrators? And do you have a clear understanding on the differences between those two?
I feel like I don't really have a super clear understanding of the illustrators and emblem.
Okay.
But one of my huge takeaways, I feel like, especially like in a communications course, we talk so much about like nonverbal and verbal communication, like they're not happening simultaneously. But I love how they like talked about that and how messages are completely different when the two are put together. And I think that kind of goes into like the leakage as well. But could you redefine or like talk about the emblems and illustrators?
Yeah, sure. I'd love to. Yeah, specifically, you know, we talk about the two of the emblems are more of these signals and signs that we use that are based on society or culturally based. So we use the illustration as a universal emblem might be when we put our hand out to stop, right? That is an emblem that we can use. We see it represented physically when we use an emblem. We see it printed, you know, like the actual hand gesture as an emblem that really associates that is what that means. And that is pretty universal. However, in some societies, what might be universal here as an emblem, such as thumbs up, is an emblem that we might use for communication as a society, that we think that everybody can relate to thumbs up, where, you know, in other countries, thumbs up is not so good. You know, thumbs up in some countries is like using the middle finger, you know? So it is based on what society has incorporated as that emblem of that particular symbol or gesture. Whereas the illustrators are what we use to accompany this, you know, we also use it as body language. Whereas, you know, we might, while we're discussing, like I'm one typically when I'm lecturing or where I'm talking, I didn't really realize how much I really used my hands to communicate. However, they keep me on pace oftentimes, is what I do find why I do use my hands a lot. And these gestures, they help to emphasize or overemphasize how we communicate as maybe a repeat of the message. For example, you know, it's just like with young kids and teaching our young kids, we're using our hand motions a lot You know, even we teach them, you know, to stand up, you know, where we're raising our hands that way. Might be some gestures, but we might stand up, or we might physically stand up and use the illustrators as well. So illustrators usually help to paint an additional point or paint this picture of what we're communicating. So the emblem is more dictated by society and what they are deeming as, yes, this is what we're going to use, a little bit more culturally or society based. Whereas illustrators are just maybe part of our personality that we use to help emphasize or overemphasize a point of our message. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Yep. So good to know on that. All right, so I think at this point I want to maybe, okay, let's get to the pause, or just want to quickly go through these because I don't know if you had a chance to write them down. I'm just going to quickly move through them, and so you know that these are some of these represented as nonverbal. And so the first one is repeating, repeating the gesture, just like we might say stop, but we might also use the hand motions to stop. So repeating is number one. Next, we're going to go into this substituting when we use these gestures, as a cue, you know what I mean? It's just like, okay, it's time for us all to come over, and we're going to use this gesture to substitute or emphasize a little bit more of our gestures of verbal and nonverbal communication. Turn taking, that's another one that's really a good thing to focus on, as far as when we're communicating. Some people kind of ramble on in their talking and communication. I think we all know that type of person or whatever. Perhaps in a meeting session or a team building or team group meeting or whatever, when we're sharing our ideas or something, there needs to be a time where we are allowing these gestures to reflect, I'm closing my statement and now I'm moving over to that new turn. And so it's this signal of allowing the next person to come on board and sharing. Next is complimenting, that area of using these messages to compliment. We see this so often. If we're giving a speech, if we're giving a lecture as an educator, of course, whenever I'm at the podium or on a stage, or we're looking in the audience and we get some gestures that we might see, some complimenting gestures of this nonverbal nods that people like, yeah, I get it, I understand it, we're nodding, I agree, whatever. But we might also do this with regard to our own gestures of communicating when we are saying yes, and we are also agreeing and shaking our head verbally as a yes, or giving a thumbs up, complimenting the situation. Next, emphasizing. Of course, we do this most often. Most of you have commented today on the reason why you do like this combination of face-to-face and verbal is because it helps to enhance that verbal message of where we're able to use this tone and pitch to indicate or emphasize excitement. So these are very important. And then that last one, contradicting, that's that one area, of course, that we do send out these mixed messages of where we're really contradicting what might be actually leaking out. So the illustration of this leakage might be where, we're really nervous about something, our hands are shaking, our knees are shaking or whatever, but we're saying like, yeah, we're ready to go. So it might be a little contradicting message that takes place there. So these are the last areas that I want to go over today, which has to do with those micro expressions, and even commenting a lot that these are those little quick minoseconds of our microseconds that we see these expressions that take place. You know, like for example, someone says something that might be offensive and you might make a sour face. You know, these are what we refer to as those micro expressions. Oftentimes we don't really think that people are going to see them, but our bodies tend to naturally just react to it. You know, something that, you know, that causes fear or anger, sadness, disgust, contempt. You know, oftentimes they use these techniques in, you know, profiling within detective work and having to do with interviewing individuals. And so we give off these micro expressions of our true feelings. Years ago, I worked for Arizona State University and for this research project where we had to interview individuals for this particular project. And what we had to, when we went through this training, when we're interviewing other individuals, we had to make sure that we didn't show any of these micro expressions with regard to what the individuals that were being interviewed and their responses. You know, some people can say something that shocks us and, you know, our eyes widen and we feel like, oh my gosh, that's embarrassing or whatever. So this is what we mean by those micro expressions that kind of sneak out sometimes. So, you know, over the next few days, take a look at that and some of the people that you are around. And this, as I mentioned, this nonverbal exercise, this is one of the areas that really we can observe with individuals' expressions. Okay.